didn't grab one. He didn't say anything to you. That's good.
Well, that's the thing.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Eric, are you ready? Yes. Okay, great. We may have you met me before. I'm Don Durden. I think everybody's met me, co-chair with Bob Manning here. Appreciate you being here. If you didn't get an agenda, there's one down there. I think Bryce is gardening. We've got consideration of the minutes if available, and Erica did a bang up job of getting them to the co-chairs, but we didn't get any comments back to her, so we'll defer that to the next meeting. Next one is public comment. We have 2 opportunities for public comment. This is the first one. Any public want to make any comments?
Good.
I'm just here to watch the show.
I'm sorry, you need to get a life.
Why?
Hope you're not disappointed. All right, no public comment. Update on membership. Since the last meeting, we have had at least one addition. Dale Yulberg was appointed by Commissioner Chapman in Precinct 3. He's not here today because he had a conflict, but he will be joining us. I think he's an engineer by training, and I think he's got a military background as well, so he'll be with us. And I think that's the only addition. Mr. Costa, you were here last time, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I think that's the only membership updates. We do have one vacancy at Fair Oaks Ranch, and we met with Greg Maxton, Mayor of Fair Oaks Ranch, and Gary Manitsis, the former mayor, and they're in the process of getting that position filled. So we'll be back to full strength pretty quick. Bob, you want to have any opening remarks?
Sure, we seem to be as good at scheduling these meetings as TxDOT is to close I can. I'm a good surprise because it looks like she'd be good when the lightning subsided. I wrote her back, she's a wimp, and she wrote back, said that's right. I wrote her back, said that's smart. So anyway, thank you. We may have the same quorum issue that we had last time. There's a lot of concern about whether we could take a vote, so I don't even really want to bring up that agenda item 5 until we clearly have enough people in here to approve what seemed to be a consensus around combining the GIS and the past studies / projects committee, but we just didn't feel like we could take action last time for lack of quorum. I think we're in, right now, I'm looking at the blank name cards over there. I think we're in the same boat. So that's kind of all she had.
Okay. The next topic that we have today, throughout the conversation about transportation in Kendall County in the past few years, there's been this sort of underlying current of we're just not doing a good enough job planning. You know, we need to know where these major thoroughfares are going to go, and then that gets wrapped up in where you can't put it through someone's property. You still need to identify where it's going to be right away. And so I think that, I know the city of Bernie has heard that. I've heard that as a county commissioner. And I know the city of Bernie is moving forward. I understand there was some concern about how the city was moving forward with its major thoroughfare planning effort. And so I think Jeff Carroll has got a presentation today to talk about the city's effort. And then Rick Taboka is with the county, and Rick is going to tell us about what we can and can't do, and how that process might relate to the city's process going forward.
Sure. So I'll just start on the committee's website and the past studies tab. For those who might not have seen it, as the City of Bernie's thoroughfare plan. So in 1974 was when the City of Bernie's first major thoroughfare plan was introduced. It was updated again in 2004, and it was updated again in 2010. And 2010 is kind of some major changes to what we have today. And it was updated again in 2017, and then 2019 is the version that we're currently using. So those thoroughfare plans are a map. So it's a map that has existing roadways and proposed roadways on there. And we have classifications for arterials, major and minor arterials, primary and secondary collectors, and several different road classifications. So some of those, looking back, it's actually really neat to go back and look all the way back to the 1974 major thoroughfare plan, and there's a concept of what Herf Road that got built 10 years ago is shown on the 1974 thoroughfare plan. So I thought that's interesting to go back and see that people were thinking of that in 1974 before me. So we're working through, so we have a map of roadways, and what we use that today for is when developments come to town. So when we have Esperanza or South Glen or Regent Park or South Glen, or even other developments that are adjacent to these roads on the map, if we have a major thoroughfare plan in place, we can require the right-of-way. So let's say South Glen and Regent Park, they're having to provide the full right-of-way for their roadway section. But Texas state law has an item called rough proportionality. We can't make them necessarily build the entire road if their project isn't big enough and doesn't put enough demand on the roadway. So say Regent Park and South Glen, they're giving us 94 and 100 feet wide right-of-ways, which are set and made for a future 4-lane road, but their development is only enough such that they require 2 lanes of traffic. So if you go out there today, there's 1 lane in, 1 lane out. That's kind of the same with Esperanza and others. So the thoroughfare plan gets us to require the right-of-way. They have to give that to the city, and then based on their development, they have to build the roadway that their development needs. So the city then at a later date can make that a CIP project, or if another developer comes in that continues that roadway on, they might have to go back and widen that existing road. So some of those projects eventually will get some lanes widened to them. The other thing is we have other developments in town, say on Cascade Caverns or Old San Antonio or Ranger Creek, that when those old county roads that turned into city annex roads and the developer shows up, we're having them provide the extra half of their right-of-way. If our thoroughfare plan says it needs to be a 100-foot right-of-way, and today it's a 50-foot right-of-way, they have to provide their half of the right-of-way. So they would have to give a dedication of 25 feet. So 100 minus 50 divided by 2. They would have to dedicate to the city that 25 feet. So that's additional roadway for us to do future projects. And then based on the proposed traffic of their development, they may or may not have to actually do road improvements. So we have a handful of projects in Old San Antonio, Abington Apartments, and a couple on Cascade, or even the movie theater on Old San Antonio, that their project helped generate enough traffic that our code required them to go build an extra turn lane, a right turn lane, a left turn lane along those ways. So that's kind of the purpose of having that major thoroughfare in place, is when developments come, we can try to get the developers to pay a lot of those improvements for us. So we are in process of preparing a RFQ, or request for qualifications, for engineering consultants to update our major thoroughfare plan. As part of this update, we're going to be looking at updating the map itself. But we also have, for every one of those roadway sections, the major arterial, minor arterial, the collectors, we have a cross-section of what that roadway should be, that it's X many feet of pavement, X many feet of bike lane, and X many feet of sidewalk, and this many feet of grass between the sidewalk and the curb. So we have a prototype of what that street section is. We're going to be updating those cross-sections with the major thoroughfare plan as well. Today, a lot of our road requirements for collectors and arterials have bike lanes on the pavement. In general, more the common thought now is to have those bike lanes be up as a shared use path. So instead of a 5-foot sidewalk, you build a 10-foot sidewalk, and that could be the bike lane and the pedestrian route. So that seems to be we're going to investigate and look at that a little further. And then just look, as the city, as mentioned previously today, the city of Boerne is about 20,000 people, plus or minus. And our ETJ, or extraterritorial jurisdiction, is 1 mile from the city limit line. When we hit 25,000 people, which that could be in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, talk demographics. So probably definitely before the next 5 years, we're going to hit 25,000 people inside the city limits. And that's a magic number for cities. It's the moment that happens, our ETJ can go to 2 miles. So that means the area around Bernie that we can enforce City of Bernie rules is almost gonna double, 1 mile to 2 miles. So as we look at our major thoroughfare plan, when we hire that consultant, select consultant, and we get moving forward, that's something we're gonna look at. Our thoroughfare plan that's out in the books today does go out plus or minus to that area, but we're definitely gonna look at that and think through that, what those roadways are gonna be. And obviously we'll coordinate closely with the county and whatnot as we go through that. There'll be quite a few public inputs on that as well.
Yeah, as a note of, just to speak about what Jeff's talking about right now, we do coordinate with the city on all projects in ETJ. So we're all in the same room talking about, transportation, and in particular, if these thoroughfares or transportation corridors are identified on the city map. That's in the ETJ. When we get out into the county, outside the ETJ, Kendall County has not adopted a thoroughfare plan. It's been talked about for many years. I think it goes back as far as Don Alley. Kendall County does have authority under Local Government Code 232 subsection E, because we're adjacent to a high population county, i.e. Barrett County, that we can develop a thoroughfare plan with right-of-ways up to 120 feet. Okay, that's never happened. I would have to say that being part of for transportation planning in the past, before I worked for the county, if you start going out into the county and you start looking at locations that would support a thoroughfare, it's essentially a constraints-driven analysis, and you're going to end up with alignments that look very much like what was rejected by the Commissioner's Court several years ago, because it's constraints-driven. In other words, you're trying to avoid certain features, properties, historic, cultural, biological. So when you start getting outside the ETJ and you're looking at developing a thoroughfare plan, greenfield thoroughfare plan, it's not going to look that dissimilar to what was presented. Now, the other alternative the county has is to declare or identify existing roadways as thoroughfares, adopt that, and then we would adopt sections for those specific roadways that would allow us to ask for dedications as development occurs adjacent to those roadways, similar to what Jeff was saying. Now, the largest section that we have in our rules is a collector, because again, we're not dealing with the urban type development with multiple access points, significant left turn movements, right turn movements, and things like that. So our section for a collector is 76 feet of right of way with 32 feet of pavement. And those are minimums now. I mean, first I should say those are minimum values. So if your development, traffic impact analysis, and or if it's a development that grows more development, then of course those are minimum values. But you do want to have a vision so that if you're asking for 15 feet from one side in the beginning, you're not trying to expand that section later. But that being said, it really has to, again, just being an old TxDOT guy, it has to do with design speed, how close your driveways are, and what your turning movements are. You take State Highway 46, like in my direction where I live, there's a 2019 traffic count on State Highway 46 close to where George's Ranch is going to go. It's 10,000 ADT, okay? 2-lane roadway. But it functions because it's through traffic, and that's important to, if you're looking at mobility and looking at moving people around, you generally are trying to look at a limited or controlled access type facility that doesn't allow, it's not like driving downtown Bernie where it's a driveway every 40 feet. It needs to be spaced out. And TxDOT does that with driveway spacing requirements based on functional classification of the roadway and the design scope. So, let's see.
Oh, Rick, who takes priority in the ETJ?
In the ETJ, we defer to the transportation plan for the city of Bernie. Now, we work with the city of Bernie because there's been some issues pertaining on who's going to maintain the road if it's not in the city limits and things like that. But the fact is that's the only plan we have is the city of Bernie. And with the exception of, and we're contemplating taking our new set of rules to Commissioners Court with any luck in several months, and when we do that, we will be naming, or with the Commissioners Court input and blessing, certain roadways that we would call collectors and other roadways that we would call less than a collector. But certainly, like you can, out in the county, you have Old Number 9, you have Cascade Caverns, Waring Welfare, Upper Cibolo. I mean, there's really a number of these roads that behave differently than a lot of the cul-de-sac roadways that really, you may be able to put a subdivision on it, but they just function differently. I'm trying to think, I made a list of a few of Upper Balcones, Old Fredericksburg.
I was gonna comment about your question about NETJ. Our current conversations with TxDOT, we have a very good relationship with TxDOT now. The city of Bernie's access requirements for driveways on arterials, which is Highway 46 and a couple other HERF road, is actually more stringent than TxDOT's requirements. And current TxDOT is actually listening to the city. And if we say our code doesn't allow that driveway on Highway 46, they're listening to us and not allowing it. Even a couple of years ago, TxDOT would just ignore the city and say, we don't care what the city rules are, our code allows that driveway. So there's several driveways that have appeared on Highway 46 east of Bernie that we didn't want, but TxDOT overruled us on. So that's a conversation that's changed with current TxDOT people and Kerrville and San Antonio.
So each city that has an ETJ is required to have an agreement with the county in whose area that city exists, and that is an ETJ agreement. And it's renewed every 2 years or so, something like that. It
Correct.
basically says whose rules are in charge, and it's negotiated between the city and the county. And thus far, it's been the city's taken that on, except for septic tanks and floodplain, which is done by the county. But I think, since I've been here as a commissioner, I've seen improved cooperation between the city and the county, but I believe that we need even more. And that was one reason I personally would like to see us, and I'll ask you if it's helpful. I mean, you've got, you said about 5 different roadway classifications, major, minor arterials, I think.
Sorry,
And you have major and minor collectors, or just
Primary and secondary.
primary and secondary? And all we have is collectors, is that right?
The collectors are largest, again, it's a minimum value, but that, again, is just, our typical development out in the county doesn't look like and operate like a dense development you may see adjacent to the city in the ETJ.
So the city has, I think, 11 or 12 different roadway classifications, and honestly, only about 6 or 7 of them are used all the time.
Right.
So that's actually something we're looking at.
Winnow that down some.
Correct, that if they're not used. For example, we have, some of it's tough for us because we have some classification, like primary and secondary collector are based on the ADT volume. So there's some collectors that we know will never cross that threshold to go to primary from secondary. But then there's others, the way our code is written now, that today will be a secondary, but we know when the next part of the loop gets built or the next continuation, it'll be a volume that needs to be the bigger one. So that's the way our code is written, is kind of tough, so we can fix that.
That major thoroughfare plan addresses the city and the county roads. But a big component of that whole system is the TxDOT rights of way and roads. that shows up on the major thoroughfare plan, right?
Correct. We have all the text dot roads as arterials classified on our city permit.
And we can require setbacks of 50 feet anywhere on TxDOT, right?
We need, the Commissioners Court needs to adopt the thoroughfare plan or existing roadways as thoroughfares for us to be able to do that. TxDOT has limited authority on what they can ask for, and that was one of the reasons it was brought, you know, once the Commissioners Court adopt that State Highway 46 as a thoroughfare, then the county can enforce that setback requirement. Right now, we ask nicely, and we get cooperation most of the time.
Hi, Bitsy.
Hey there.
Well, Erica, if you'd have the minutes reflect that one of the recommendations the committee should consider, and we have, one of our work products is to make some recommended policy changes that the city and or the county can adopt that would facilitate. I think that should be one of them, that we adopt a major thoroughfare plan and that allows us to require those sorts of things.
Sure, and really, as we were speaking, it's, you have the state facilities and the county facilities, and depending on how we classify that roadway, we can ask that same dedication on a county facility. Kind of the linchpin on these definitions for collector and residential have to do with the data inputs that we're putting into the rough proportionality spreadsheet. So when we're calculating the impact or demand impact on a facility from a proposed development, we're using, if we have it identified as a collector, we're using that section to estimate the cost to bring that, you know, what it would cost to bring that facility up. And on another note, that right-of-way dedication is part of the rough proportionality. So that's really the first component on the list. So depending on how the property is valued, then a lot of that funding pertaining to that, or that cooperative funding with the county, is absorbed by the right-of-way dedication.
And Don, where do we find these definitions and the metrics that are tied back to these roadway definitions?
Well, they're probably in their development codes.
Subdivision ordinance.
I don't know that there's a
Universal.
universal definition. I mean,
Every city, every county says slightly different terms.
But what Rick is referring to as a collector is the same
Similar.
metric as,
Somewhat similar.
Yes, it may be a few feet difference in right-of-way, but probably not. I think ours is 72 feet, 76 feet.
Our secondary is 72.
72, there we go, right.
But, I mean, I think if we're gonna double our population in the county, and the city's gonna take on a lot more area at some point, at least in the ETJ, I would think we could line our classifications up.
Sure.
I don't know if that's possible or not. I would like to think it would be.
It is. So what's the ADT on your minor collector?
10.
10K?
Yeah.
We'll see, we're a minor collector then, for all practical purposes.
So the other part though is our sections include sidewalks and bike trails and other stuff like that. Or in the city, that's something that not necessarily in the county that everyone is gonna have sidewalks or whatnot, so the sections could vary. Or we have curved streets with drainage while you have bardages that need a wider area for that bardage area, so, but still getting the pavement and the travel lanes the same is definitely something we can work on.
I got a couple of questions. It's intriguing, the idea of the county declaring existing roads to be the thoroughfares, which would seem to then start to paint the thoroughfare plan in those areas. And I don't know if it's complete enough to be a standalone statement I just made, but it's a good start, because as you know, the community got pretty freaked out a lot of times about brand new lines on a map, 300-foot wide, going through family estates and living. And we can declare existing roads to be the backbone of those thoroughfare plans. I think we've gone a long way to address pretty strong and legitimate concerns. Jeff, you touched on my second question for you. And it was, does bike trails, I mean, bike lanes and trail system, lie throughout your thoroughfare plan, you're having developers dedicate a right of way or do the construction?
Correct, and let me add for your first point as well, just so everyone knows, Comal County, a couple years back, did adopt a major thoroughfare plan, and it's only existing roadways. They don't have any proposed roadways on their thoroughfare plan. So if you look at some of the developments, say what they call Blanco Road, their Blanco Road, there Ortiz and Highway 46, there's a lot of residential development happening there. That major thoroughfare is allowing the developer to pay for all that road wide because it's on the major thoroughfare plan. So other counties will take it in there. So second, the bike lanes. Yes, our collectors, every street in town, any road section has sidewalks on it. Today, all of our roadway sections require sidewalks. But then collectors and arterials require a bike lane, and it's currently shown in the extra wide pavement. So we have 5 additional feet on both sides, 10 additional feet of pavement overall for bike lanes. Again, that's something we're thinking about, trying to make the sidewalks bigger to try to get our roads narrower.
Okay, one quick comment and then my final question for you. In my walks around town with my neighbor, we walked through residential areas that were roughly the same age. Some of these residential areas have sidewalks throughout, and some have none. In residential, not commercial development. That's just odd and it's unfortunate.
I would agree with that.
And part of what I hope the committee can, on a policy recommendation too, I think we might have touched on it before, is putting mailboxes in the middle of sidewalks and turning
So-
90 degrees, because then they're useless.
So I will comment, if you were to ask the postmaster, probably 90% of our mailboxes in town are illegal and should be removed, and if they would want to come back and put all cluster mailboxes in. So it's a very fine line of, a lot of the mailboxes don't meet any requirements of any kind for road safety or postmaster. So it's something that when our sidewalk projects, we thread that line.
I get it, but, common sense that
Yeah.
we want sidewalk to put telephone poles and mailboxes like this.
Exactly.
Could you spend a few sentences describing, because you were here last time, and you know the concern that bubbled up from the committee when you talked, you answered a question from the public, and you started talking about the thoroughfare plan, and the committee got immediately concerned about what kind of coordination specifically do you see happening between your selected consultant and this committee to keep us from being redundant?
I mean, I definitely see that there'll be, our consultants, when we select them, will definitely probably come to several meetings here and listen to get feedback from here. They also probably will scope in several public open houses as well. That's something the city does quite a bit. So our public open houses on that part as well to get public input. But really, it's just taking our current thoroughfare plan. There's some roads that just need to be tweaked, or the other part is, so our thoroughfare plan is kind of a 30,000-foot view. So lots of times, they don't have to get built in the exact same spot. We're concerned about connecting, let's say, Highway 46 to Johns Road. We want to collect a road that will connect Highway 46 to Johns Road. Whether it's this exact spot or if it's 500 yards this way, as long as it connected Highway 46 to Johns Road. That's our intent, is the connectivity, not necessarily the exact spot that it is. That's something that we'll look at through there, because there have been some of our developments have tweaked and changed some of those roads. We'll update the map as well for how the roads actually got built versus how the plan built.
Jeff, question, with existing subdivisions in Bernie, where there's only one entrance or exit, like Creekside, Ramsey Creekside, at what point are they required to have a second outlet?
So that's an interesting conversation. Current code versus old code are very different items. The code that we're requiring today, the fire code and city of Bernie code, basically the moment you pass 30 houses, you need a secondary entrance. So there's lots of subdivisions in town that don't meet that requirement. That's the code we're enforcing today. So there's lots of items in Creekside, for example. We just received the preliminary plat for the next unit at Creekside that's going to extend HERF from the dead end now all the way to the branches of Creekside Boulevard. So that'll be that secondary entrance. that one. And then again, that thoroughfare plan, Creekside Cove, will dead end on the southeast corner of that property. And if the property next to it is ever developed, then it'll get continued, and the property next to that will get, and eventually, for the thoroughfare plan, that's a loop that connects to Cascade Caverns.
Yeah, because those connectivities will help with keeping cars off of 46. You know, you think about it, you know, I don't know how many houses are in Creekside right now, it's gotta be at least a couple hundred. If you take a kid to school, you know, and then a walk, or they take a bus, you know how to go, so that'd be good to have that.
Yeah, that's something that when the city of Bernie did our master plan several years ago, that was a widely heard public comment about interconnectivity between neighborhoods, and that's something that was built into the code. So following fire code, and city of Bernie current fire marshal is enforcing the fire code a lot more than previous people. That's definitely the rules we're following.
Kendall County's working under the same rules also. The 30 threshold requires a second entrance, at least half the distance from the first entrance of the largest diagonal of the subdivision.
And so even there were some developments previously that they were emergency secondary access points that the general public probably doesn't even know that exist. That's the Esperanza one. You go into the other ranch entrance, and they improved the ranch road. The general public doesn't even know it's there. So there are some like that, and we changed our codes to not allow that anymore. Further, that it has to be a secondary roadway connection, no different than anyone else.
Does the county have a role in the MUDs and WCID, their designs?
Those are licensed and permitted through TCEQ.
The creation of them.
Right. Well, I mean, but as far as we don't review the MUD's water plan, I mean, in other words, we're not looking at their engineering drawings and all that, and we don't have a regulatory authority over them. They just have to demonstrate to the county that they have the capacity and ability to provide the service that they're claiming they can provide. You know, if it's for 100 homes or 200 homes or connections, however that goes. But
So let's use a real life example. Let's say Bernie Mac, where you have a WCID down there that is being developed basically by their own financing mechanism, WCID bonds. But they have a development agreement with the city of Bernie, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, they're doing some improvements to scenic loop under the development agreement, or is that a rough proportionality deal?
it's under the development agreement, but it's based on rough proportionality. And again, I think that's a very good example of how the city and the county have been working well together, because we've spent many hours on that project, because it's not just improvements to scenic loop, it's going to be improvements to Valerie, it's going to be improvements to Corley, realignment of Corley, and of course their utilities are going to be running the water and wastewater through the Kendall County right-of-way. So it's yeah, in fact, that was our conversation in the back of the room whenever before the meeting started on how we're dealing with the plan submissions and the sequencing.
That was one that they performed, the developer performed the traffic impact assessment as part of the development agreement negotiations. So we looked at the impact that their development was creating and built-in requirements for all those road improvements. And again, that also has an east-west collector road. Again, they're going to dedicate the full right-of-way, but only build partial lanes initially. But the development agreement for that project will actually require them to build the entire portion. There's a couple kickers when that part would have to get secondary part of that.
In terms of rough proportionality methodologies, are y'all on the same sheet, or do you have one method in the county as another?
The method's the same. What changes is the sections, and in other words, what the components are. You know, they may have stormwater, curbs, sidewalks, and a specific section with hot mix. We're going to have a specific section with 8 inches of base, seal coat, borrow ditches, things like that.
The same consultant prepared both. So it creates the project creates a demand on the roadway network system. And then we have predefined, collector road is X dollars per mile, arterial road is X dollars per mile, and it compares those two. So our roadway costs are different than the county roadway costs because of the difference in road
Right, but the methods analysis is the same.
Because it's comparing the demand versus supply, and saying if it creates a if then, yes, no at the bottom answer.
But now, in fact, that's why we chose the consultant was for continuity.
If they have to cross a big creek and there's a bridge required on that road, does that factor in, or that's just part of the same roadway crossing?
So that is not, we have minor drainage structures built into our cost per road mile, but in that case, they add that as an extra item that they're having to do.
I'm sorry, Ben, I interrupted.
No, I'm good, but, my question is, you know, say it's a smaller WCAD or MUD, are there any mechanisms by which we can require that they would allow for connectivity on the other side of the development? So say they came off of, I don't know, like all the different roads that are coming off of right now, but
46 to Hammond Road.
thank you. 46 Hammond Road, can we require that they would bust through
So-
on the other side?
I always get my wicked 3 and wicked 4. George's Ranch is the one on about 46 East. So that is completely outside the city ETJ. So all the plating and roadway rules are gonna go by the county rules.
And so the county can require them that they would,
We can't require it, but we can mention it, it's been mentioned.
That's correct. That's
So,
correct.
so if our major thoroughfare plan would have gone out that far, and if it would have been a city project, we could have required a connector between Highway 46 and Hammond. But neither of those things were in place. Our ETJ is not that far, our thoroughfare plan doesn't go out that far. So that's again, going back to why we're really looking at making our thoroughfare plan go back further, or expand the radius out.
I feel the county would support 100% if, for example, the city of Bernie had a thoroughfare map there, that we would have supported it 100% for the dedication of right of way. But it's not there. So as it pertains to connectivity between 46 and Johns Road, that will probably ultimately happen through the Laramie Hills and Bud, but that's probably years away.
Any further questions for these guys? Thank you all for being here, and thank you for what you do. Bob, you wanna talk about you wanna introduce the demographic study group?
Last time when we were going through the subcommittees, we talked about the education committee or outside experts committee, and they need to keep learning and keep bringing in national experts on various topics that we may not know about. And Jim was here, and he said that Tim would take care of everything in that regard.
Haven't I already? Not likely, right, Ben?
You agreed.
I did.
So then what the group searches to some of the best national experts on our relevant demographics are at BISD. And so Rich Sena said that in 10 minutes or less, he's going to lead this really in an hour and a half. We're going to scratch the surface. And Henry Acosta is going to be a part, but you brought the experts, so I'll let you guys introduce them.
Yes, sir.
Nowhere to go.
All right, this is how we pull away from the table, right? This is John Ramirez. He's our transportation director for Bernie ISD. John comes with vast experience. I think he started out in Uvalde, so he comes from a small town. Went to work for Northside, so he comes from a big district also. And then we were lucky enough and fortunate enough to bring him to Bernie. So with that, John Ramirez. Yeah.
And I don't know about this expert title, but I'll try.
I guess we'll start off with just a brief update of many people in this room already know all this information, having seen it the last time, or the folks with the city and the county, but it's important that we go through where the growth is going to be. I don't know if I probably should point out, you don't have that little pointer.
I don't have the clicker.
Clicker, that's all right, I'll use this thing. So, just press.
Ben has everything.
Ben has everything. Rich, Ben has a playbook.
Boy Scout bags.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
There you go.
Yeah, that's good.
Pulling out the electric feet.
Efficient technology.
Do a drill.
Have a grill and drill.
Which side, there you go.
But pen I use for hot dogs, so it's.
Just start pressing buttons.
Here we go, okay. This, what this shows here is for Kendall County, starting in 2000, all the way to 2018, the growth. And right now, we're gaining close to 2,000, about 2,000 people a year in Kendall County. Now, Bernie ISD is more than just Kendall County. We're not all of Kendall County, we're probably, I don't know, three-quarters, two-thirds, three-quarters of the population of Kendall County. But then you have to add in the northwestern section of Bear County, and we have a small slice of Comal. So the district is probably growing at easily 3,000 people a year. Okay? This over here shows all the top 15 districts in size in the San Antonio metropolitan area, multi-counties, whether it's Atascosa, Medina, Kendall, Comal, Guadalupe, Wilson, Bear. Bernie ISD is the 11th largest out of the 15 largest ISDs in the metropolitan area. However, we are third in the number of new students over the last 5 years. So along with Comal, which is number one, Northside, which is a massive district of 106,000 students, they've gained 4,000. They're still growing, but they're not growing at the rate they used to grow at. Comal and Bernie are both running around 4.5%, 5% per year. Schertz-Cibolo's growth has slowed down. Medina Valley will probably grow even faster percentage-wise than Bernie or Comal. But we're concerned about this area, so we're third in the number of new students we've added. We're gaining, even with COVID this year, where statewide, there were 4% less students in K through 12 public ed in Texas this year than last year, 4% less. We grew at about 2.3%. So we still grew, we just didn't grow at the 4.5% to 5% that we expected to grow at, but all signs based on enrollment to date with new students show that we'll be back up there next year over that kind of growth. This just shows the number of students that we had. Back in 2008, we were at about 6,200 students. We're at 9,800 today, and I think there's little doubt that we'll top 10,000 in the coming school year. We're forecasting somewhere around 10,200. So now the growth percentage rate really started kicking in around 2012. There was a dip in 13, but ever since 14, we've grown at 4% or greater per year. So it's been 7 years of 4% plus growth. The way that our demographer did the methodology, we've got some handouts for committee members that Henry will distribute later. But basically what PASA does, and that stands for Population Analyst Statistics something or other, I don't even remember. They broke Bernie ISD up to 86 planning units. And for instance, planning unit 86 is Camp Bullis. So you have like one student who lives in Camp Bullis. It's a massive area. So when people see the Fair Oaks Elementary Zone, they see this big area, but most of it's military. It's actually a fairly tight area. Our Van Rob, which is our newest school, this is it right here. That's it. That's the zone. So you've got this massive school district with small zones in the more densely populated parts of the school district. Conversely, in the northern part, 55 is a ranch. It's just one big ranch, and there's two kids that are there. One's a ranch family, the other one's the ranch worker, and there's two kids. So John knows that our bus has to go all the way the heck up there when that ranch really ought to be in Blanco or Comfort ISD, but I think somebody had some pull 50 years ago and they said, no, we want to hurry on. I don't know. But there's 86 planning units, okay? And what we have in the handout is the number of new expected housing units in each planning unit over the next 10 years. We have it in a 5-year period of time, and we have it in a 10-year period of time. But what you'll see when you study the planning units is that essentially those units along Interstate 10 and along Highway 46 are just going to have a lot of housing units coming to them. Now, what PASA does is they contact the owners of the land and say, what are your plans? Do you have plans? And they may talk to a ranch owner who says, well, I'm not planning anything now, but you know, I'm 82 years old, I've got 3 kids, my wife is deceased, two of my kids live in Nevada, and the third one lives in Dallas, so I suspect it'll probably get sold. So figure within a decade something's gonna happen. So they're not gonna put that down as immediate development, but they'll put it for development maybe in the latter half of the decade. So they've spoken to every major landowner with 20 acres or more of undeveloped parcels in the school district, and that's a lot of phone calls that they made.
I've got that spreadsheet, yeah, I added that spreadsheet.
Henry, thank you, Henry. Okay, so you can't see this, but basically what it'll show, let's go through an example. Blanco Road area, zone 41. It's the Blanco Road area from Plant to Esser. And there's expected 79 housing units over the next decade. Well, that's a developed area. Where is that gonna be? Well, there's some land right on Blanco Road where they've already approved for zoning like 40 some odd townhomes. And there's another area nearby, so it's infill in the city, okay? In planning unit 46, which is off of Adler Road, they're currently building the Blue Bonnet Apartments, which is 69 units. That's gonna open up probably later this year. And there's a small ranch nearby where they expect 60 homes to be developed. So, 129 in that planning unit. So what we did was we took a spreadsheet for every part of the city, or every part of the school district. This one says Bernie City, east of Interstate 10. We've got one for the northwest, one for the southwest, one for east going out towards Bergheim. We've got one in the Fair Oaks area, and we've got west of Interstate 10. So every part of the school district, we have a spreadsheet that shows the planning unit that you saw on the previous slide with the expected number of new housing units. The variable is the number of apartments, and there's no shortage of plans or dreams or whatever for apartments. There's gonna be a lot of apartments coming in the next decade, okay? This one here shows a 5-year forecast from 19 to 24. Everything in red is 300 or more housing units. So, for instance, going west on 46, you've got Myrna Lomas, which we know is going to be 1,100 units. I think they've already got about 60, 70, 80 houses completed, something like that. But in the next 5 years, they forecast more than 300 just in Myrna Lomas. Then you've got Spencer Ranch, which is a lighter shade. It's more of a peach colored. It's going to be 209 houses, but then they're talking about multifamily housing, which would be in the next 5-year period of time. So people say, well, gosh, 46 West right now is kind of rural going out to Pipe Creek. It may be rural, but there's one active subdivision and there's another one where they're clearing the land, and I think they've gotten one plat approved, I'm not sure. So 46 West, a lot's happening. And we already know about 46 East between Esperanza. The 2 subdivisions next to Esperanza is Champion Heights and Woods of Bernie, and those are almost full. And George's Ranch, that's the Kendall Farms, is that what they're referring to? That's Kendall Farms. Okay, so that's, I think, 750 or whatever. But that shows growth on the back half of the decade, not on the front half of the decade. I believe that's the case. So you'll see mostly a lot in the south, Regent Park, 850 homes eventually, which is west of Interstate 10. You've got the Backy development. Do they have a name yet?
Bernie back.
Bernie,
Or
yeah.
Peter Horn.
But they don't have some fancy name like Mira Lomas?
Yeah.
So there's gonna be, what, 1,100, 1,300 homes, something like that in that development. So you can see west of Interstate 10, south of Upper Balcones, between Balcones Creek subdivision, which is 80% or more full, that's 550 homes. The Backy development, Regent Park, you're looking at over 2,000, about 2,000 homes yet to be built right in this area west of Interstate 10. So invariably, you'll say, well, aren't we going to build a school there? Yes. We're negotiating, Mr. Acosta's negotiating and wrapping up a school site well, it's no secret, I mean, thinking back to development said they were reserving close to 20 acres for the school district, and those are moving along well, right, Henry?
Yes, sir. You know, I will add that this would be our first campus on the west side of 10. All right, forever and a day, we always concentrated on the east side of 10, right, inside the city limits of Bernie, and of course now Oxford. But this would be the first property. One of the first things that we did was put out an RFQ for real estate services, real estate agents, right? So we don't know that we are shopping heavily now on the west side, you know, and looking at the county and everything. With that is infrastructure and the need for infrastructure to now come on the west side. So.
Absolutely, because I'll never forget when I was on P&Z years ago, Chris Turk said, all the land south of Upper Balcones is relatively flat, therefore buildable, and 300 some odd acres of the 1,100 acre Beaton Horton Ranch sold. When's the next 700 going to go? I mean, who knows? But the owner may have an idea, I don't have any idea, but it's logical to think at some point that's going to be developed. So then you say to yourself, my gosh, west of Interstate 10, south of 46 for sure, and certainly south of Upper Balcones, you're going to have eventually a couple of thousand homes built in the back area or more. 550 at Balcones, the remainder of Regent Park. And fortunately, some of these zones down here are mostly nature preserves, so they're not really going to be built out much. In fact, these two planning units here, there's no homes forecast for the next decade. Same thing with this area, which is the Krodkowski Reserve out here, takes a big chunk of that. But there, in this area, if you were to say, what's it going to be like in a decade, 12, 13, 14 years, west of Interstate 10, south even of Scenic Loop, you would have enough kids in Bernie ISD if you took that zone and maybe added the Van Rob zone, which is this area over here, and you could have a high school that feeds just this part of our district. So instead of eventually having all these kids traveling through Bernie to get to Bernie High School or to get to Champion High School, they'll just stay in their area. And it's a fairly compact area because this is not going to be developed. So really you're talking right here. That's what you're talking about with, you know, now we own land for a high school out in Bergheim where the Boston Middle School is, but if you look at the numbers of the growth, we could build the third high school there, which will have to be before the end of the decade. We will have a bond in all likelihood next year in 2022, but that's going to be for an elementary school, number 8, west of Interstate 10. That's going to be for a facility that will be utilized by both high schools for special programs. And that'll buy us 3 or 4 years having to build a third high school. And the reason we don't want to do that right away is because it's very expensive to run a high school, the operational costs. And we just got out of Robin Hood in a significant way 2 years ago. And it takes a while to build up the few $1 million in operational costs in your budget to be able to afford a new high school. You can build it with bond debt. You can do that, but then you have the operational money to fund it. So we really don't want to go down that road anytime soon, but we're going to have to by 28, 29 in that area, and hopefully that will service this area. Now we have 3 middle schools right now. We have one that's right around here, and we have one that's up here, and we have one that's out here. So it's logical that eventually we'll need a middle school west of 10 and south of Scenic Loop. We're building one elementary, and there'll eventually probably have to be 2 in this area. Whether that's number 10, 11, or 12, we don't know. Depends on the growth rate. But there's a lot going on over here. This is Fair Oaks, and that is the Bernie, Kendall County Fair Oaks Transportation Committee. But Fair Oaks itself is almost built out, with the exception of what's called the reserve, which prospectively could be 600 homes up in this area. The other danger spot, well, I call it a danger spot, I mean, Lily Creek or Lily Ranch, right? 500 homes or whatever on Old Fred, and how many other ranches on that road are going to drop over time? I mean, if I own 40, 50 acres there, and I have horses, and I like my rural lifestyle, and all of a sudden there's a 500 home subdivision next to me, and I got a developer knocking on my door offering me X amount of money per acre, hey, I might wanna move to Mason. I don't know what Mason's like, but it's more rural than here, you know, so, will we need another school east of Interstate 10, south of Bernie? Or if we eventually build the schools here, do we rezone enough, and do Van Rob and Kendall suffice for handling those elementary kids west of Interstate, east of Interstate 10? We'll see. So you see all this. Now, you know, you go out 474, that's Phillip Ranch, that green thing up there, that's an 800-acre ranch, but because of the 6-acre rule, it's 110 houses. So that doesn't really have a lot of density. And I drove through there recently, and they're building a lot of houses. So I was amazed at how many houses are going up out there. So we'll see what happens in the more rural areas. When you look at those spreadsheets, you'll see that the real density of population is going to be really 46 and south. That's really what it's going to be. Okay. This is the 10-year, so there's just a lot more red, and this really fleshes it out. This down here is not in Fair Oaks Ranch, it's in Barrett County, and that's 500. That's a 500 home subdivision that the land sold in January of 2018. They're already in that subdivision as of May 2021, 3.5 years later, not even 3.5 years, there's already almost 400 homes built. Wow. To go from, hey, land closed, to infrastructure, roads, utilities, blah, 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 almost 400 houses because they're in the $300,000 price range. And families are snapping them up because they want to be in Bernie ISD, Fair Oaks Elementary. It's a really compelling sale. So you see all the red, okay? And 146, there's your Spencer Ranch. There's a 127-acre ranch that's on the market. I think it actually sold recently. You guys would, some people in this room might know better than me, but that's frontage road on Interstate 10, which is expected to be housing. So between Spencer Ranch, apartments, houses, development of that ranch, Mira Lomas, that's 1,700 houses, housing units right there, basically along 46 or north of it. We know what's going on in the southwest. This over here is Old Fred. This unit here, which is planning unit 80, which is in Barrett County, it's just south of Balcones Creek. That's where Lemon Creek is going to be. That's where HEB is going to build. They're going to build 600 apartments there. Some townhomes, 30, 40 townhomes, but then there are other developments forecast to be in that zone as well. So that's not in Bernie, that's not in our ETJ, but it's in Bernie ISD. And even though you don't get as many kids in apartments as you do houses, when you have 1,480 housing units, whether it's 1,200 or 1,480, that's a lot of units. There's going to be a lot of kids. So this is what keeps us up at night. There's all these new things that are happening. Okay, this shows you the multifamily projections, possibilities, and no surprise, they're in the same locations. This shows the projected number of single-family houses in the 5 years from 19 to 24, and then 24 to 29. Same thing with multifamily, mixed use, senior living, just, it's thousands.
Is the gray bar the existing, the red's of the future?
No, this is what is expected with single family in Bernie ISD between 19 and 24. So we're already a year and a half into that period of time. And I will tell you, the single family, go back to the slides that I showed with the maps, the houses are being built. I don't know if it's at the rate that will lead to this, but if it falls short, it's not gonna be that far, it falls short, you know, because houses are selling fast. It's everything we hear. And then the final slide shows the 3 scenarios of growth. According to PASA, the slowest low rate of growth, which is still 4.5% to 5% a year, would bring us to 16,760 kids by the 2029-30 year. We have 9,800 now. So, so that would be a gain of almost 7,000 kids by 29-30. If we grow at the intermediate level, it's 19,000. If we grow at an elevated FAFSA level, it's 20,600, which is more than doubling. So, I mean, forget new schools, forget all that. It's just, how do you maintain the culture? We have a certain culture in our school district that we want to maintain. And it's a clear culture, and it's one that's very attractive to families. So we want to keep that culture. You know, there was a big thing. The city worked with us great last year. It was a homecoming parade. Seems like a simple little issue, okay? Well, a rumor got out. You know how rumors go. There's all sorts of rumors. If you ever want to hear a rumor, look at Facebook, okay? So rumor that the city's not going to give us the permit. Well, Dr. Price called the city. No, you'll get the permit, don't worry. But they did have a meeting to go over the rules. You can't throw the candy anymore out to the kids. It's an unsafe practice. But the point was, you had a lot of worried football moms, cheerleader moms, that they were looking forward to this parade, because that's a sample of the small town. We're a small town. We still do things like that, you know? And, you know, you start losing things like that, then you lose kind of what it's all about. So we want to fight to hold on as long as we can. So that's basically, that's the update of all, it's all in the presentation we passed out there. But Henry is our facilities director. He has a huge portfolio on his plate. And John Ramirez joined us, as he mentioned, from Northside. Very, very good and knows his business. And we had a very fascinating discussion the other day with Ben about like traffic patterns and safety standards and all this and all that. So I'm sure they want to add some thoughts as well as answer any questions that people have.
So right now, you know, I was telling John, I was telling Priscilla and Ben yesterday, you know, as we go into the facilities planning, right, on the long range plan, some of the things that we're doing in order to work with the current situation, right, on the roads and everything is, when we're looking at property, when we're shopping for property, we're not only looking for a site, but also for sub-sites, right, that can host down the transportation department, right? So we'll have mini substations, right, so we can stay on that side of 10, right, and then, and keep those kids on that. The other things that we're fighting on is some conversation that we had earlier. It's these subdivisions where John has to turn in with the bus, right, and then back out, because right now there is no connections, right, and then you're trying to get the kids to walk. And if we can't get at least vehicle, can we get pedestrian walks, right, through these subdivisions? And what we were talking yesterday with Ben is a lot of it's just, you know, we feel it's low-hanging fruit as far as code enforcement, right, our code policy, right, putting that into place. Just take some statistics, and I'm gonna let John talk. He's gonna tell you about, you know, how many kids can we put on a bus, right? What are we planning as far as future in the next 5 years, 10 years, right? How many more buses we're gonna put, and how we're gonna deal with that. So John, if you'll help us with that.
So just one thing to consider is each bus takes 36 vehicles off the road on average. So buses can carry up to 71 students, elementary school students. Now try to squeeze in 71 high school students, but industry standard doesn't differentiate between that. We pretty much, high school, at about 50, I start getting nervous. 55, we're really trying to look at moving to another, and seeing what we can move to another route. So we've taken that into account. It pretty much breaks even between our secondary and elementary about the number of students we transport, since we're 2 bell times. So the challenge of that is there's a lot of subdivisions that are built right next to the school. An example is Regent Park and Stonegate, Roots at Bernie, the apartment complex, right up against the campus. And there's no direct access. They have to go all outside San Antonio. There is no improved walkway there. And they gotta come back all the way around because they're within the 2 miles. Whereas if there's a walkway, you're talking a quarter mile safe route. And then you get them off the main street. So as we go into the future, that's one thing we wanna encourage is these developments that make sure there's you only need a 15-foot space at the most, just a safe walk path to the campus if you're within 2 miles of the campuses. A lot of things that we ran into also is these subdivisions go right next to each other. I don't want to mix with the next subdivision. We need that gate up there. Emergency service can get through that gate. That's great. Kids can't get through it. And we saw this a lot at Northside. I mean, it was ridiculous. You can have a half-mile walk to the school, no problem, clear and free off the main road. But yet, because they put those gates up there, and they had walk gates, but no, can't have that open, you gotta have those locked. Those kids ended up now having a 2-mile walk to get all the way around to get to their campus, which now creates the need for buses, which we're already strained. It's already hard to get, meet what we can at 30% ridership, more or less. The more dense we get, the more students are going to ride on the bus. When you look at the more dense areas, you start pushing closer to the state average of 47% riding. And so if you're looking at, right now, we have about 3,000, between 2,500 and 3,000 in a given day. Occasional riders make it interesting and fun. So if you're talking 20,000 students, let's look at worst case scenario, and we're talking pushing it closer to 10,000, that's gonna be a lot of buses on the road and trying to move them up. So anything we can do to encourage the walking and biking and safe paths to those campuses is what needs to be encouraged. Plus, there's a lot of parents that don't want to put their kids on a bus for different reasons. Number one, hey, we're gonna take an hour sometimes to fill up that bus, depending on the ones we go way out. So we may have to pick up, even though you're within eyesight of the school, because of where you're at, we may have to pick you up 45 minutes before school starts, because we gotta pick you up and get on a pattern and come back. A lot of parents don't wanna do that. Now, we have a lot of traffic. I don't know if any of you picked up students at any of the schools lately, but it's fun. And they start lining up 30 minutes prior. We have other neighborhoods, and some of the examples of those gates are like Regent Park and Bernie Heights. They're your place in Telford Way. Connect perfectly. It'd be great to be able to drive right through there. It's a great pickup on the one side, on the other. But instead, we have to turn around, back up, because everybody loves these cul-de-sacs now. And that's the other bane of existence for transportation, cul-de-sacs. We don't like them because a 40-foot bus means an 84-foot turning circle. And oh yeah, the turning, that's 90 feet. Now put 2 cars in there, because that becomes a great parking spot for all those. Now you can't. And so doing that is not fun for a driver. Walking, biking trails, connecting. We talked a little bit about that to the campuses. There's a lot of opportunities existing right now that we might be able to open up. I know in my neighborhood, Rancho the Creek side, they're talking about the backside connecting to Hill number 9. That would be great when that happens. I'm gonna probably break some hearts there by going, hey, that's a great walking path. Now they can go straight to school. That area right there, I don't need to have a bus there, because the odds of anyone needing a ride from there, they're gonna take that path all the time. Herf Ranch and Sillow Creek are probably great examples of where to put a school in comparison to main roads because of traffic backup. Herf Ranch especially, you have that long Esperanza Boulevard go all the way up there. You never see the traffic back up all the way up at the beginning. Whereas Van Rock, there's no, that traffic is backing up into Dietz Elkhorn and causing a major issue over there, which we're trying to take the buses out of there, but pretty hard to get them out of the way that quickly. So that's a consideration also when we're looking for land, not right next to the major road, knowing full well we need some lead for the parents to park, because they're gonna come and they're gonna park half an hour at a time, and they'll find a place. One other thing that we just brought up was gate timers. A lot of us that love these gated communities, these little pocket neighborhoods, they open the gates at 7. The more dense we get, and depending on the bell times, I need to pick up kids before that. You don't want to know the amount of clickers I have and trying to keep track of codes and all this stuff. And then when you have a substitute driver and someone doesn't take the right key and you don't want to leave them on the bus, and it creates a little bit of a logistical nightmare. Plus, it's a security concern for the neighborhood. You don't want that many clickers out there. You don't want that many people with numbers to access the gate. So something as simple as, hey, can we just move that time to 6 o'clock if you're on a time one? And I won't have to bother you forever, because there's really very, very little reason for me to be in your neighborhood before 6 with the buses. And statistically speaking, I'm not sure how much crime takes place between 6 and 7 in the morning. Most of us are getting up and leaving around that time. I know in my neighborhood, I say I'm leaving around that time to go to San Antonio. So things like that. There's also the Safe Routes to School program. It's a national program. Austin ISD started to talk with them, that it's a cooperation between the city and the ISDs, and it's a big push from the city. But basically, they focus on encouraging walking and biking to school for the kids. And there's federal grants, and there's some funding opportunities there. I don't know all the details yet, but I'll share as I pull more up and discuss with the Boston ISD director, to work together to find those kind of opportunities. And that's it in a nutshell. Did I talk enough?
That's basically we brought, I know, within our new design, like I was saying earlier, one of the things that we're trying to incorporate, especially on the west side of 10, right, is trying to find enough parking. That way we can accommodate transportation now on some of these sites, right? So we currently has expanded our market to where we're gonna do that. We're gonna buy some property, right? It's not to host buses. Another thing that we're looking at is changing our section detail on our pavement, right? Before we had a bus, just strictly a bus pickup, right? Well, now with so many moving parts and the way traffic is going, we're actually looking at just one section detail where we can, if we want to come back and change that bus route within that campus, right? That same pavement detail can now host buses on the front of the school and also on the bus pickup. Right? Currently, that kind of prohibits us, like at Van Robb, for instance, where we have that one issue, right? We can only push the buses there because my pavement detail is only provided, that's the only thing that can host them buses. So that's another thing that we're trying to do is incorporate all this.
One other thought on, when you mentioned west of Interstate 10, it would be nice if when we build our elementary school number 8, that every subdivision west of Interstate 10 from Scenic Loop down all the way to Tar Pond Drive, which is the extension of Fair Oaks Parkway, it would be very nice if every single subdivision or house west of that would be zoned into the new elementary school. Because right now, you've got all these subdivisions where buses and cars go across the freeway to get to either Van Robb or Kendall Elementary. And it would be nice if that wasn't the case, just keep people closer to their schools. You're still not gonna necessarily, because Balcones Creek, which I mentioned, is over 500 homes, there's no back way. I've heard the developer's gonna do something or whatever, but Alamo Community owns a bunch of land there, and there is a developer that bought some land next to Scenic Loop where they're gonna build houses, but that road needs to continue, because you don't want 550 homes, which currently feed into Kendall, staying at Kendall. We're gonna need room at Kendall for all those subdivisions on Old Fredericksburg Road. So, and it's a simple fix. It's a 150-foot little road. And that's outside of the county and the city, but it's an example of the kind of thing that has to happen if you want to improve mobility.
I was gonna comment that the Herb Elementary, because I'm driving and doing meetings out in Esperanza, but that left turn length there, I remember watching that when I first got built and was thinking how crazy long that left turn bay was, and it's full almost every time I go out there. So that should be a model. If you need, for that many students, you need this long of a turn bay getting into a school anytime there's a left turn movement, because it seems to be working there compared to some of the other schools.
How many bus trips do you all have? Do you know how many bus trips come across the west part that you're talking about to the east part, to either Kendall, Bernie South, Bernie High School? How many bus trips and average car trips? Because a lot of parents still want to drop their kids off and pick them up, so that's 4 trips back and forth. Do you know how many currently come across, and what would the reduction be if you put schools on the west side?
Well, the major reduction is, like I said, I-10 is a barrier. There's only certain places you can cross, and going up and down. So I would say a good quarter of our trips have to go that way, and it's not only that, there's only certain ways you can get there. And right now, even with construction, even better. So not having to cross back and forth I-10 and remove that traffic from having to go across those choke points, those 4 locations we can go across, that would be an immense value. And for the buses, keeping them all on one side, very efficient. You don't have to come back until you come back to the station. If we have a station down there,
No sense of numbers of vehicles that have to cross every day.
So I have 56 routes right now, and with between special needs and the other ones, I'd say about 25 buses are going back across I-10 twice a day, easily, 4 times, so back and forth, back and forth. So right now, but in the future, and I'm not too worried about right now, it's not that bad because it's not high density yet. In the future though, we can't keep doing that. That's the amount of buses, it's gonna tend more to a 50-50 if you start looking at how the growth's gonna happen.
So that's 100 bus trips back and forth now. How many car trips would you guess if more than half our kids don't ride the bus?
I brought somebody with me.
Car trips are, we see daily, go across 10 and then back across 10, drop the kids off, and then back and forth again to pick them up.
And I come across the Indian Road in the morning, trying to get to school. That line, it took me, I was driving on a bus the other day, 5 iterations of light before I could finally cross. And I've got, and you know, it's a very tight planning when you're doing it on the, you're trying to give the parents some kind of predictability, and I want to pick up your kid, but not 2 hours ahead of time, but I need to get them there in time for breakfast. And then you got to deal with 5 light rotations. And then the kids aren't getting there with enough time, and then you have star testing, and you have this testing and all this stuff. So the more cars and the more vehicles get there, that's just gonna get worse. Numbers wise, if you think about it, you got double in size. I've got 59 total routes with other vehicles, double that number. Even though it gets more dense, I still need more buses, there's some of this capacity, so double that number of buses. So, but ideally, you want more buses, because then you remove 36 vehicles crossing that point.
We were talking about the vehicles, Tim, you know, and that's on a good day. You know, like right now, you saw us on the phone, on the computer and everything, we're looking at, you know, low water crossings and everything, and then how John's gonna change the route. You know, just getting to Kimball right now, they just shut down that low water crossing over there. So now we're pushing the buses back on 10, right, to come around to get the kids over at Van Robin, over at Kendall, and get back. So all bets are off once we get, you know, yeah.
So, one last question. Rich, thank you all of you for being here to do this. The areas that you have delineated here, can they be further broken down into census tracts? Or is there any relationship to census tracts that's apparent? What I'm trying to do is find a way to get this information incorporated into the AMPO travel demand model, because I think your data is better than yours.
You know, I don't know how they came up with the 86 planning units.
Okay.
It could be based on census.
Well, I'm sure they can overlay it with GIS.
Yeah.
AMPO does have their demographic study, been provided to them by multiple people.
Have they updated it though? I mean,
They haven't updated it.
That's my opinion.
Should be able to add that later.
All right, guys, I want to add my thanks to you guys for all of the presentations so far. It's been enlightening. To you guys, you know, my 2 takeaways are just the crushing growth that you documented. It's coming our way whether we want it or not. Whether it's permitted, it's happening, it's on us, and for the sake of, you know, as relevant to this committee, that just that mandate that we drive towards deliverables, that we drive towards recommendations. We're not fixing things cleverly, I think, and your numbers are just terrifying in that regard about the urgency. My second takeaway, John, your comments, that it seemed equally important that we address non-automobile solutions as well as automobile solutions. Yeah, moving from cars to buses, but moving from all of that back to bicycles and feet. That's how a lot of us went to school when they're sitting in this room. There's nothing wrong with it. But we gotta make it safe and doable and possible. Having said that, we have a special guest that crept into the room and would like to address us for a few minutes. And that's one of our the mayor of our sponsoring city here in Bernie. I'd like to introduce for anyone who doesn't know Tim Hendon, Mayor Tim Hendon.
Great. Minutes, how are you?
So, I'm gonna stand up, that's okay. Cool.
Did you tell them we met last week?
No.
Not that you want it to be.
It's out now.
It's out now, yeah. We met as a steering committee last week, most of us met as a steering committee last week. Outgoing mayor meets us, incoming mayor Greg Maxton, who's on his way here. So I'll buy a couple of minutes while we're waiting for him to come in. And Judge Lux couldn't be there last week, but we just talked about the reboot that's going on with this group, right? New members coming on, old members, well, former, long-term mayors, old members, old members. So I just want to start out again by saying thank you for being on this committee. My neighbor, our dogs play together and we walk. We got lots of feet on the street out there. You guys have been, I look back, this book I have has everything I've done since I've been in city council, and I was looking back at, in 2019, when most of us met, and we talked about this committee. I was over at the school, talked about the charge that was in front of us. I had a real sense of urgency coming in, especially to the mayoral role, that we've got some serious challenges, road-wise, transportation-wise, multimodal transportation-wise, and I talked about I would like to get set up for a bond issue if necessary in 2020. Remember that conversation? It seemed like such a great idea at the time. And actually, in February of 2020, I did a State of the City address and talked to approximately 400 people. And it was actually well received to paint the pictures of all the challenges that we have in our community, and that we haven't done a bond issue in over 12 years, and perhaps it makes sense. Not just in the city, but certainly from a city standpoint. County's got their financial perspectives as well. So I was just going back looking through my notes and going, wow, that seems like such a long time ago, but not so long ago. We had great momentum with this group coming out of 19 and coming into 20, and then obviously what happened in 20 happens. So that's no fault of anybody here. And I'm really glad that we're getting back together again. I know we just started last month. I have urged these two to get together a long time. I've continually pushed these two. Come on guys, we gotta get something done. So I'm glad we're getting back on track. I guess from my perspective, I feel like when we got started in 2019, we're easily 10 years behind in our transportation requirements. Nothing's been done around here in 40 years, substantially. Yet the amount of population that we have has quadrupled in size in that 40 years. And I didn't get to what you were talking about earlier, but I've got lots of data that points to we are absolutely going to double in size in this community again, community count, in the next 5 to 10 years. There's no question about it. In my day job at Santikos, I have a real estate arm. We work with some pretty savvy real estate people. You work with demographers, I'm working with capitalists. They have the exact same information in terms of the growth that's coming, and there's no stopping it right now. The majority of it, 95% of it's in the county, of course. But when you look at the permits that are being pulled and you look at what's coming, we've met with Bill Hinckley, the owner and developer of now Esperanza, and then the future development down 46, a mile down 46, that's going to be called George Henry. 1,000 houses going in there, but he told us this last 2 months that their infrastructure in Esperanza, the new parts, is essentially done, and that the pace of developments is going to double or triple over the next 2 years. Ooh. Now that was already, that development has been in place for a long time, but he came in and now he's ramping up. We know WCID number 4A down Scenic Loop. He is putting in place now in front of the city all the plans for that. He would expect to have people in houses there probably within 2 years from today. And that's a pretty big development. We know that Southland's going to finish out. We know Region's going to finish out. We know the number of permits on an annual basis in the city of Bernie already. That number is growing. It's been flat, but now it's growing. So any developable land, any land that could be permitted is being built quickly. We know what's going on Shoreline. I don't have to point all that out to you guys. You know what's coming, but it's coming, right? So I have a sense of urgency still. I think the school is going to do a bond issue this next year. I think if we tried to do a bond issue side by side with the school doing a bond issue, that probably wouldn't be smart. Probably could cause both of them to fail, frankly. And so that's not something that I want to do to our community or from a planning standpoint. But I still believe that we're going to have to find ways. And then in defining the solutions, it's saying, what's the problem? You know, I think right now, everybody's going to say traffic in general is just a generic problem. It's just a problem. As I-10 gets wrapped up, and cleaned up, well, this next year is gonna be a freaking disaster around here, right? You guys understand exactly what's going on. As the bridge on 87 comes down this coming weekend, that's gonna be an interesting disaster for that weekend. But worse, when they get to the bridge on 46 later this year, I'm sure that Jeff has already explained that to you, and they start to raise one lane at a time of 46 from Home Depot to I-10, 10 feet, that's gonna be a nightmare over there. And we're gonna hear about traffic. Anyway, I think positioning for a bond issue year after next makes a lot of sense, because people are gonna be tired of this. And I think about the problem, the solution to what, for Bernie, the most common thing I hear is, we wanna get the heavy traffic off of Main Street. It's the most common thing I hear. The only way, and why don't we just take over Main Street from TxDOT? We can't. We can't until we have a solution for routing the heavy traffic around Bernie. Can't have that continuing to come down. Lots of ideas have come up. Why don't we take Main Street down to one lane and do diagonal parking? I've heard lots of concepts. Let's slow things down. Let's make the speed limit 10 miles an hour. It's not our road. We don't control it. But I would like to find a way to get that commercial traffic off of Main Street inside of Bernie and get stuff going around. That's probably the number one thing I hear. The number two thing I hear is safety. We hear that time and time again. Councilman Bodie here has been on just even looking at Plant Street and Blanco and Old Number 9 in Blanco. Safety is everyone's top concern. And multimodal transportation that comes in with that. Those are the big things from the city of Bernie standpoint that I hear every stinking day. I tell them we have a transportation committee, and I'm waiting for their solutions to be put on the table that we can consider from a council standpoint, from a commissioner's court standpoint. And so, look, I know this is tough. There's going to be emotion. There's going to be winners and losers in some people's minds on this. I know it's going to be hard. But we're going to have to kind of belly up to the bar here and figure out what are the right solutions. Minimize collateral damage, but we can't continue to do nothing. You said it as I was, you were pandering. You knew I was going to say this, that doing nothing is really a terrible option, which has been done quite well for the last 20 years, doing nothing. It's not going to work. And my view in our conversation that we had last week is, look, if this committee can't get this figured out, then let's get rid of the committee. And let's get some outside consultants to come in and get who will be paid and motivated to get this figured out. I would prefer that this be a grassroots effort from the community. That's why we started this. That's why we, you and I specifically, agreed to put this committee together. Is let it be from inside, not from the outside. We live here. You have to accept that there's going to be some casualties, but there's a process for that. That doesn't mean that people just lose their houses indiscriminately. That's not what we're talking about. This stuff is planned out. There's ways you get access. I know that's a scary conversation when you speak ignorantly about it. When you speak intelligently about it, there's a process that will follow, and we just have to lay all that out. So I still have a sense of urgency for what you guys are working on. I'm keenly appreciative of what you guys are working on. I understand the degree of complexity of finding these solutions. I absolutely get it. But I also feel kind of obligated to find some solutions on behalf of this community in the role that I'm in. I feel like that it never was properly addressed from prior people in these roles. It just wasn't addressed. It was ignored. So again, I have a sense of urgency. You know my game plan. We were talking last week about probably the proper time to be thinking about finding solutions is now. Probably in the next 6 months. It makes a lot of sense. If that stretches into a little bit longer than that, that's okay. But when you start talking about a bond issue, which I've never been through, so I speak with total ignorance here. But I've learned from you that you don't just snap your finger and put a bond issue on the election ballot. You have to plan for that. And you got to usually back up 6 to 9 months. So if we're going to do this in May of 22, let's back up. We got to vet this with the community as well. Let's back up. You guys have about 6 months to put something together. That's how I see it. So that we can get community involvement, as we've been doing. The whole point with this committee was to be open. Take away the boogeyman of there's stuff going on behind closed doors. There's not. We continue to talk about how we work together. We continue to talk about, we were talking last week about projects that are coming up. If the city of Bernie has a project to relook at its thoroughfare map,
I want to do that with the county. We need to be thoughtful and say, we're not independent bodies. We need to be thinking about this as one community. And when Jeff and his team are working through that, my commitment is we'll continue working with the county on that. It's not an independent thing. And it should be in concert with what's going on here. So if what you're hearing from me is a sense of urgency, then message delivered. If there's any ambiguity in what I'm saying, well, please ask your question and figure out what are you really asking? I'm hoping I'm not providing ambiguity here, but rather clarity in terms of what we're looking for out of this. That's some of what we talked about last week.
Yeah, I think a good time to recognize Greg Maxton here, the new king of Fair Oaks Ranch.
I don't know about king.
Do you have any comments that you'd like to add?
Well, I'm new to the process, still learning, but understand what Mayor Handren was saying, and yes. If you look at what we're doing as part of Fair Oaks Ranch, and we see the development, we see growth, it's happening every day, and if we're not planning for the future is going to happen, and we're not going to be ready for it. And that's kind of the message that I heard you presenting, is that we really got to start understanding what the future brings to us, identify it now, and if 10 years is that gap that we need to be looking out, how are we preparing for what we believe our city is going to build out to 10 years from now? So that we're not standing 10 years from now wondering what the hell should we have done, and then trying to deal with the higher price tag, and a lot more concerned citizens that are wondering why the city never weighed in to get things done previously. And so it's kind of what I ran on, is to become the mayor, is really planning for the future and understanding all of that development that is going on right now, and how we plan and prepare for that today so that we're ready for it when it happens. Does that make sense?
Thank you both for being here. You know, I hear a lot of people say that they just want politicians to tell them the truth. And then when politicians tell them the truth, they start getting mad. But, you know, I think what you heard here today is the truth, and without a specific agenda other than to solve the problem, at least start to address the problem. I don't think we will be able to solve the problem in our lifetimes, but we can make a difference in it. So appreciate y'all's support and encouragement, and we'll do our best to meet your timeframes, and hopefully we'll find a way to divide the baby and not kill the baby.
And we have continued to set aside funds if there are requests for any kinds of, whether it's research or other things to support you guys, that was always available, that continues to be available. You just gotta ask. You know, and our friends at TxDOT, you know, if we need studies, they can help with that too. We have the capability for limited amounts of some of those kinds of studies. Look, we can study this thing until the cows come home, and that's a great tactic to delay. But we know, and whoever was on the past studies committee, you're probably tired of looking at all the past studies. There's enough of it's been done. It's a matter now of doing something. It's kind of the way I see it. So, old phrase my dad used to do, belly up to the bar. That means, you know, let's get on with it. Let's get on. So thanks for letting me come in, and happy to take any questions if you have any questions. By the way, I'm always open to that stuff. I'm going to share the same message with our city council meeting next week on Tuesday. Probably make it an agenda item to talk about what's going on with the Transportation Committee based on our conversation this past week. And if you want to, you know, listen, anything you want is going to be provided from a support standpoint. You're here for that very reason, right?
And doing a great job.
Absolutely. So I would just say, if you don't ask, and if we just continue to wring our hands and we don't make any decisions, recognizing there's hard decisions to make. There's no question about it, but we got to get on it. That's kind of the message. Very good. Well, and again, I just want to thank you all for being on this committee. I know, again, it's time consuming, it's emotional, depending on where you sit, but you all bring perspective that's valuable to the entire process. So thank you. Cool. All right, I'll get out of here now.
Thank you.
I'm interrupted your agenda.
Very quickly, the Alamo Area Metropolitan Planning Organization has reached out. Amber Perez, who's a public information officer, has asked if we have somebody that would like to help her with outreach. They're working on a new transportation improvement plan, and she's got a flyer here. She said that they have 72 projects that have been nominated, that they're competing for funding. They will be having a public outreach process throughout the Amco area between June the 1st and June the 27th. And so it's not a, lifetime commitment here, but she's looking for somebody hopefully from the outreach committee that would assist her in reaching out to the community and make sure that people are aware of their local public involvement processes. Anybody wants to volunteer for that?
I'll volunteer Northern.
All right, I'm gonna hand you this and Amber's contact information is on the agenda. And feel free to reach out to her. And she was not real clear about what she wanted you to do. It was something about door hangers and making refreshments. Bob and I were talking up here earlier about combining the GIS and past project subcommittees, and I think there was some discussion about that last time, and there was lack of a quorum to have a decision made, and I think we're in the same situation here. So we either need to like modify or maybe we can just decide by consensus among those of us that are here, if y'all are good for that.
It sounds reasonable to me, frankly, so whether we have to formalize it or not, it's not like we're making a big decision about where a major thoroughfare is gonna go. It's more just a matter of getting from here to our endpoint somehow.
I'm here from the other side of the community, the other subcommittee, and I've got one or two people participating, not yet participating, but available to participate. So I think having a few more members would be very helpful.
So is it, so I'll